Peekaboo, I see you. Guess who's back? Uh-oh.
No, it's not scary.
Going to bed, honey.
I'll tell you guys a story. It was a dark and stormy night, and the men were all gathered in the captain's chamber. One of the men piped up. Captain, tell us a story. The captain smoked his pipe and began. It was a dark and stormy night, and the men were all gathered in the captain's chamber.
No, we're not reading the Elmo story. Alright, Cinderella. Once there was a gentleman who married for his second wife the proudest and most haughty woman that was ever seen. She had, by a former husband, 2 daughters of her own humor, who were, indeed, exactly like her in all things. He had likewise, by another wife, a young daughter, but of unparalleled goodness and sweetness of temper, which she took from her mother, who was the best creature in the world. No sooner were the ceremonies of the wedding over, but the mother-in-law began to show herself as her true colors. She could not bear the good qualities of this pretty girl, unless because they made her own daughters appear more odious. She employed her in the meanest work around the house. She scoured the dishes, tables, etc., and scrubbed Madam's chamber, and those of Mrs., her daughters. She lay up in a sorry garret, upon a wretched straw bed, while her sisters lay in fine rooms, with floors all inlaid, upon beds of the newest fashion, where they had looking-glasses so large that they might see themselves at their full length from head to foot. The poor girl bore all patiently, and dared not tell her father, who would have ratted her off, for his wife governed him entirely. When she had done her work, she used to go into the chimney corner and sit down among the cinders and ashes, which made her commonly be called Cinder Wench. But the youngest, who was not so rude and uncivil as the eldest, just called her Cinderella. However, Cinderella, notwithstanding her mean apparel, was 100 times handsomer than her sisters, though they were always dressed very richly. It happened that the king's son gave a ball, and invited all persons of fashion to it. Our young misses were also invited, for they cut very grand figure among the quality. They were mighty delighted in this invitation, and wonderfully busy in choosing out such gowns, petticoats, and headcloths as might become them. This was a new trouble for Cinderella, for it was she who ironed her sisters' linen and plaited their ruffles. They talked all day of nothing but how they should be dressed.
For my part, said the eldest, I wear my red velvet suit with French trimming. And I... And I, said the youngest, shall have my unusual petticoat, but then, to make amends for that, I will put on my gold flower mantle and my diamond stomacher, which is far from being the most ordinary one in the world.
They sent for the best tire-woman they could get to make up their headdresses and adjust their double pinners, and they had the red brushes and patches of Mademoiselle La Poche. Cinderella was likewise called up to them to be consulted in all these matters, for she had excellent notions, and advised them always for the best, nay, and offered her services to dress their heads, which they were very willing she do so. And she was doing this, they said to her,
Cinderella, would you not be glad to go to the ball?
Alas, she said,
You only jeer me. It is not for such as I am to go thither. Thou art in the right of it,
replied they.
It would make the people laugh to see the cinder wench at the ball.
The stepsisters sound like Babe.
But anyone but Cinderella would have dressed their heads awry. But she was very good, and dressed them perfectly well. They were almost 2 days without eating, so much they transported with joy. They broke above a dozen laces in trying to be laced up close, and they might have had a fine slender shape, and they were continually at their looking-glass. At last the happy day came. They went to court, and Cinderella followed them with her eyes as long as she could, and when she lost sight of them, she fell a-crying. Her godmother, who saw her in all tears, asked her what was the matter.
I wish I could. I wish I could.
She was not able to speak the rest, being interrupted by her tears and sobbing. This godmother of hers, who was a fairy, said to her,
Thou wish thou couldst go to the ball. Is that not so?
Yes, cried Cinderella with a great sigh.
Well,
said her grandmother,
be a good girl, and I will contrive that thou shalt go.
When she took her into the chamber, she said to her,
Run into the garden and bring me a pumpkin.
Cinderella went immediately to gather the finest she could get, and brought it to her grandmother, her godmother, not being able to imagine how this pumpkin could make her go to the ball. Her godmother scooped all of it out inside, having nothing left but the rind, which done, she struck it with her wand, and the pumpkin was instantly turned into a fine coach, gilded all over with gold. She then went and looked into her mousetrap, where she found 6 mice, all alive, and ordered Cinderella to lift them up to the little trap door, then, giving each mouse, as it went out, a little tap of her wand, the mouse was that moment turned into a fine horse, which altogether made a very fine set of 6 horses, and a beautiful mouse-colored dapple gray. Being at a loss for a coachman,
I will go and see, said Cinderella. If there is never a rat in the rat trap, we may make a coach of him. Thou all art in the right, replied her godmother. Go and look.
Cinderella brought the trap to her, and in it there were 3 huge rats. The fairy made choice of one of the 3, which had the largest beard, and having touched him with her wand, he turned into a fat, jolly coachman, who had the smartest whiskers ever beheld. After that, she said to her,
Go again into the garden, and you will find 6 lizards behind the watering pot. Bring them to me.
She had no sooner done so, but her godmother turned them into 6 footmen, who skipped up immediately behind the coach, with their liveries all bedaubed with gold and silver, and clung as close behind each other as if they had done nothing else their whole lives. The fairy then said to Cinderella,
Well, you see an equipage fit to go to the ball with. Are you pleased with it?
Oh, yes,
cried she,
but I must go thither as I am, in these nasty rags.
Her godmother only touched her with her wand, and, at the same instant, her clothes turned into cloth of gold and silver, all beset with jewels. This done, she gave a pair of glass slippers, the prettiest in the whole world. Being thus decked out, she got up into her coach, but her godmother, above all things, commanded her not to stay till after midnight, telling her at the same time that if she stayed one moment longer, the coach would be a pumpkin again, her horses mice, her coachman a rat, her footmen lizards, and her clothes became just as they were before. She promised her godmother that she would not fail of leaving the ball before midnight. And then away she drives, scarce able to contain herself of joy. The king's son, who had told that a great princess, who nobody knew, was come, ran out to receive her. He gave her his hand, and she alighted out of the coach, and led her into the ball among all the company. There was immediately a profound silence, and they left off dancing, and the violins ceased to play, so attentive was everyone to contemplate the singular beauties of the unknown newcomer. Nothing was heard but a confusion of noise, like, "Ha, how handsome is she! Ha, how handsome is she!" The king himself, old as he was, could not help watching her, and telling the queen softly that it was a long time since he had seen such a beautiful and lovely creature. All the ladies were busied in concerning her clothes and her headdress. They might make some the next day of the same pattern, provided they could meet with such fine material and his able hands to make them. The king's son conducted her to the most honorable seat, and afterward took her out to dance with him. She danced so very gracefully that they all more and more admired her. A fine collation was served up, and the young prince ate not a morsel, so intently was he busied in her gaze. She went to sat down by her sisters, showing them thousand civilities, giving them part of the oranges and the citrons which the prince had presented with her, which very much surprised them, for they didn't know her. While Cinderella was thus amusing her sisters, she heard the clock strike 11 3/4, whereupon she immediately made a curtsy to the company and hasted away as fast as she could. When she got home, she ran out to seek of her godmother, and, after having thanked her, she said that she could not heartily wish she might go next day to the ball, because the king's son had desired her. As she was eagerly telling her godmother whatever had passed at the ball, her two sisters knocked at the door, which Cinderella ran to open. "How long you stayed!" cried she, rubbing her eyes, stretching herself as if she had just been wakened out of sleep. She had not, however, any manner or inclination to sleep since they went from home.
"If thou had been at the ball," said one of the sisters, "thou wouldst have been tired with it. There came thither the finest princess, the most beautiful ever seen with mortal eyes. She showed us 1,000 civilities, and gave us oranges and citrons."
Cinderella seemed very indifferent in the matter.
Is that a kind of transformer, a citron?
No.
Okay. I wasn't sure.
Cinderella seemed very indifferent in the matter. Indeed, she asked them the name of that princess, but they told her they didn't know it, and that the king's son was very uneasy on her account, and would give all the world to know who she was. At this, Cinderella, smiling, replied,
"She must, then, be a very beautiful indeed. How happy you have been! Could I see her? Ah, dear Miss Charlotte, do lend me your yellow suit of clothes, which you wear every day."
"Aye, to be sure,"
cried Miss Charlotte.
"Lend my clothes to such a dirty cinderwitch as thou art. I should be a fool."
Cinderella indeed expected well such an answer, and was very glad of their refusal, for she would have been sadly put it if her sister had lent her what she asked for jestingly. The next day, the two sisters were at the ball, and so was Cinderella, but dressed more magnificently than before. The king's son was always by her, and never ceased his compliments and kind speeches to her, to whom all this was far from being tiresome, that she quite forgot that her godmother had recommended to her, so that she, at last, counted the clock striking 12 when she took to be no more than 11. She then rose up and fled as a nimble deer. The prince followed, but he could not overtake her. She left behind one of her glass slippers, which the prince took up most carefully. She got home, but quite out of breath, and her nasty old clothes having nothing left of her finery but one of the little slippers, fellow that she had dropped. The guards at the palace gate were asked if they had not seen a princess go out, who said,
We ain't seen nobody but a young girl, very meanly dressed. It was more the air of the poor country wench than a gentlewoman.
When the two sisters returned from the ball, Cinderella asked them if they had been well diverted, and if the fine lady had been there. They told her yes, but that she hurried away immediately when it struck 12, and with so much haste that she dropped one of her little glass slippers, the prettiest in the world, which the king's son had taken up. Then he had done nothing but look at her all the time at the ball, and most certainly he was very much in love with the beautiful person who owned the glass slipper. What they said was very true. For a few days the king's son caused it to be proclaimed, by sound of trumpet, that he would marry whose foot the slipper would just fit. They whom he employed began to try up upon the princesses, and then the duchesses, and then all the court, but in vain. It was brought to the two sisters, who did all they could possibly do to thrust their foot into the slipper, but they could not effect it. Cinderella, who saw all this, knew it was her slipper, and said to them, laughing,
"Let me see if it will not fit me."
Her sisters burst out laughing, and began to banter her. The gentleman who was sent to try the slipper looked honestly at Cinderella, and, finding her very handsome, said, it was but just that she should try, that he had orders to let everyone make trial. He obliged Cinderella to sit down, and putting the slipper on her foot, found it went on very easily, and fitted her as it had been made of wax. The astonishment of her two sisters was very excessively great, but still abundantly greater when Cinderella pulled out of her pocket the other slipper, and put it on her foot. Thereupon it came to her godmother, who, having touched with her wand Cinderella's clothes, made them richer and more magnificent than any of those she had before. And now her two sisters found her to be that fine, beautiful lady whom they had seen at the ball. They threw themselves at her feet and begged for pardon for the ill treatment that they made her undergo. Cinderella took them up, and she embraced them and cried. She forgave them with all her heart, and desired them always to love her. She was conducted to the young prince, dressed as she was. He thought her more charming than ever, and, a few days later, married her. Cinderella, who was no less good than beautiful, gave her two sisters lodging in the palace. The end.
Hey, where's the part about the crows?
Well, this is the original.
Yeah.
You're talking about the Grimm's fairy tales.
Oh, yeah.
The Grimm brothers version, where the crows attack the stepmother's eyes and the stepsisters cut their toes off and stuff.
Yeah,
Yep.
some of those fairy tales are not.
Yeah,
supposed
so
to be for
I didn't
kids,
read
but
that
they're pretty
one.
gruesome.
I read the original Cinderella, not the Grimm version.
Alrighty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
gruesome. Some of those Grimm's tales.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm trying
fairly.
to steer clear of the Grimm's tales.
I'm trying to find the one I was going to read to them, and I can't. Well, let me see. It's
Oh,
at the
no,
bottom of the
Bob.
stack.
No.
It is. Here it is. This one is called The First Dog. So, long, long ago, in the great days of the Paleolithic, Kip, the cave boy, bounded down the trail on his way home. He avoided the Archons, the cave bears, and the megacross. He evaded the woolly rhinos, and the wild horse, and the mighty mammoth. But he was getting tired and hungry, and he still had a long way to go from home. He marched on until he saw a great rock. It was a good place to stop and rest. Kip reached in his bag for a woolly rhino rib, still sweaty and smoky from his fire. Suddenly, up popped Paleowolf, looking for leftovers. Wolf's nose began to twitch and sniff. He sniffed to the left and sniffed to the right. "What are you doing?" teased Kip. "All I smell are this... what can you smell in this emptiness?" Paleowolf held his snout high in the air. With his keen nose, he could smell the rain across the valley, the tracks of a tiny toad, the pelt of a preying pachyderm, and most of all, he could smell the roasted, woolly rhino bones, and gave a hungry whine. "Pooh!" said Kip. "All I can smell is my dinner, and it's all for me." And he turned his back on the wolf. But Paleowolf had already left and hurried away. When Kip saw the reason why, he was just able to get away in time. You can't see this, but there's a giant mammoth about to attack him. So, pachyderm he was talking about, yeah. Soon Kip was back on the homeward trail, and he walked on until he spied a cave. It was a fine place to stop and rest, he thought. Another woolly rhino rib, crackling and roasting from the fire. Up popped Paleowolf, looking for leftovers. Wolf's ears began to turn and dip. He listened to the left and listened to the right. "What are you doing?" mocked Kip, taking a bite. "What can you hear in this silence?" Wolf cocked his head. With his fine canine ears, he could hear a fish in the rise in the river, a leaf fall, a soft pant of a cave bear, but most of all, he could hear the snap of a woolly rhino bone, still gristly from the fire, and gave a pleading howl. "Pooh!" said Kip. "Oh, I can't hear anything, except the teeth crunching on these very tasty bones." And he threw a clump of moss at Paleowolf. It's not very nice. But Paleowolf had already hurried away, and when Kip saw the reason why, he was just able to get away in time. Yeah, apparently a cave belongs to a cave bear. Kip's not the smartest boy, is he? No wonder the cavemen don't survive. Soon Kip was back on the home trail, more footsore and weary than ever. He trudged on and on until he saw a big tree. It was just the place to stop and rest. He climbed the tree and reached for a woolly rhino rib, still pearly and greasy from the fire. Oh, this is making me hungry. Up popped Paleowolf, looking for leftovers. Wolf's eyes began to sparkle and dance. He looked to the left, and he looked to the right. "What are you doing?" jeered Kip. "What can you see in this darkness?" Wolf's eyes glowed with the sharp eyes. He could see the shimmer of a distant dewdrop, a mouse scurry far away, a feline sleeping high above. But most of all, he could see the pearly, greasy morsels of rhino bones shimmering in the moonlight, and he licked his chops. "Pooh!" said Kip. "I can't see anything, except of course for my roasted, toasted, crispy, crunchy, pearly, greasy, woolly rhino rib. And you won't be tasting that, because I want it all to myself. And he gave a loud shoo, as loud as he could. The yell surrounded
Welcome back, Jasmine.
the
Cool,
rell,
that's a
resounded
swimsuit
up
made,
and
huh?
down the tree,
That's
and woke
cool.
every living thing around. Instantly, Paleowolf's nose wrinkled, his ears went back, his eyes narrowed, his tail stood out, and he looked so terrible that Kip threw the entire bag of rhino bones down
Baby, you
the
are
tree.
filthy.
Help yourself,
Get a
Wolfie!
shower.
But Paleowolf did not care about dinner right now. His mane bristled, ridged back, and a long growl shook his throat. It was his last warning. Kip's eyes opened wide. He looked all around, but couldn't
Shower time.
but he
Andy.
couldn't smell,
Let's go to shower
hear, or
now.
see anything.
We're
He
getting a
whispered,
shower.
"What do you know, wise wolf?" But Paleowolf was gone. There was a great danger here, Kip thought. I must disappear too. He shrank into the leaf branches and made himself very small. As in he hid. Just in time, for in the high trees, the most fearsome creature, a saber-toothed cat, crouched and snarled, and she sprang and hurled past Kip, hiding in the leaves, and pounced on the pile of woolly rhino bones down below. Ooh, that was a close one. That night, he sat in the tree. Kip thought, and shivered over Paleo's last warning. It had not been a second too
Why is that
soon.
not working? Tell me.
The next morning, Kip climbed down. There was Paleowolf looking for leftovers. Together, they looked and spotted the bones where the bones had been, and were very gloomy. Finally, Kip made a speech. He said, "Wolfie,
There we go.
you use your
Now
keen
we
nose
turn the
and your
shower on.
fine ears
There
and
we
your
go.
sharp eyes
Andy!
to keep me from being eaten up, and I
Where'd
promise
you
to share
go?
all the woolly rhino ribs and mammoth meat
Turkey?
that I
She
took over
wanna
my
go.
fire."
Oh no, she's there.
She's running around the building, Miss Mandy. Go get her.
Gosh. How'd she do
Paleowolf
that?
barked, meaning yes, and wagged his tail
I
for
sat her
the
on the shower and turned it on.
a very first wolf to do so.
Where are
When Kip saw that, he cried, "I will call you dog," which means one who wags his tail. And then Kip, the cave boy, and the first dog went home.
Oh my gosh.
Yay! First dog.
Yay! Woohoo!
Yay! Bonus story.
Boots.
Awesome story.
Isn't tired? What?
Wait a minute, it's 11:35. Doesn't camp time go for an hour?
No, it's free time right now.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And then if anybody wants seconds in Camp 3, let us know.